This video is going to be about monetary policy, the economy, banking, and just money in general. How money really works. So we're going to go through some of the myths people have about the economy, some of the truths that most people aren't aware of, and then the ramifications of these. So first things first, rule 1 is the most important one that people should know, and that is that when a bank makes a loan, the money is created. So new money is created. The money that they give you is created out of thin air. Now, we know this is true. The first place I saw it was in the Bank of England where is it? Here we go. First place I was aware of it was in the Quarterly Bulletin in 2014, the first quarter, Bank of England publication. So they release these, 4 of these a year, I guess, quarterly, and they just cover, the basics, money in the modern economy, an introduction, etc., etc. Now where is it? Money creation in the modern economy. Here it is. In the modern economy, most money takes the form of bank deposits, right? So very little of the money in circulation in all countries is cash. It'd be less than 5%, probably less than 1% in all the first world countries. But how those bank deposits are created is often misunderstood. The principal way is through commercial banks making loans. Yeah, this is commercial banks. So, if you're in Australia, Commonwealth Bank, not the central bank or reserve banks or whatever. Whenever a bank makes a loan, it simultaneously creates a matching deposit in the borrower's bank account, thereby creating new money. There you go. So we know that that's how it works in England. I know that there's other publications earlier. I think there was one in 2007 where same deal, where they admit that whenever a bank makes a loan, it creates money. I know at least 2 other instances where the Bank of England has admitted this, and they've done that in a video as well, which used to be on their YouTube channel. I can't find the video on their YouTube channel, but if you just YouTube search it, you'll find it, where they admit that as well. And what's more, not just that the money is created, when the loan is repaid, the money is destroyed. Okay? should say here. Bank lending creates deposits in normal times. The bank doesn't fix the amount of money. Yes, so nor is central bank money multiplied up into more loans and deposits. So the money multiplier is a myth. That's what they're saying basically. Banks are limited in how much they can lend to. Blah 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 blah. They could quickly destroy money by using it to repay their existing debt, for instance, because they're saying that when it gets repaid, the money is then destroyed. They'd probably say this somewhere else in here. Otherwise, they're creating and destroying deposits. Just as taking out loan creates money, the repayment of bank loans destroys money. There you go. 3. Yeah. The fall in bank lending in the United Kingdom since 2008 is an important reason why the growth of money in the economy has been so much lower than in the years leading up to the crisis. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Alright, so it's one proof, evidence, Bank of England, 2014 Q1 / video where the chief, something like the chief economist of the Bank of England said the same thing. But there's more evidence so that we know that it's not just in England where this system is in place. Not that one. This one. Study by Richard Werner. Can banks individually create money out of nothing? An empirical test is conducted whereby money is borrowed from a cooperating bank while its internal records are being monitored to establish whether in the process of making the loan available to the borrower, the bank transfers these funds from other accounts within or outside the bank, or whether they are newly created. This study establishes for the first time empirically that banks individually create money out of nothing. The money supply is created as fairy dust produced by the banks individually out of thin air. Right, so this is in Germany. I know that's United Kingdom there, but he tested on a German bank. The empirical test. So annoying. Has therefore decided to approach smaller banks, which are many in Germany. So this is Germany. Universal banking, banking license, etc., etc. This bank they chose. Small bank in Lower Bavaria. It's agreed that the research would borrow 200,000 from the bank. Really interesting read, actually. It shows, the whole accounting. When the bank loan contract was signed by both the bank and the borrower, the loan amount was immediately credited to the borrower's account with the bank as agreed in the loan contract. Researcher asked the three bank staff present whether they had, either before or after signing the loan contract and before crediting the borrower's account, inquired of any other parties internally, externally, checked the bank's available deposit balances or made any booking transfers of any kind in connection to the loan. They all confirmed they did not engage in any such activity. As expected. Right. The available accounting data can be reconciled with the fractional reserve and financial intermediation hypothesis of banking. I want to see if they have anything about destroying money. No. I can't remember if they describe whether it gets destroyed or not. You can have a read of it yourself. And that proves that it works in Germany as well as England. And more than that, there was a paper produced, I think. Here we go. Yeah, so this is the Bank of International Settlements. And they had some guy come on, Thomas Jordan, chairman of the governing board of the Swiss National Bank. Some point, January 2018, there's a PDF of the full text, and he talks about how money is created by the central bank and the banking system. Here's the PDF. And he says much the same thing. Or rather, exactly the same thing. When a bank provides a loan, it credits the amount in question to the borrower in the form of a deposit to his or account. This leads to an increase in credits on the assets side and in customer deposits on the liabilities side of the bank's balance sheet. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so lending by an individual bank. He explains it here, but it's harder to understand. In present-day financial system, the creation of deposits by banks is closely linked to the granting of loans. Closely linked. It is linked. When a bank provides a loan, credit demand question. Yeah, so it's kind of accounting terms here. But he says just here. Lending by an individual bank increases deposits in the banking system and hence also the overall money supply. 6. There are a number of other transactions that change the volume of customer deposits of banks, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this is the Bank of International Settlements and, you know, the chair governor of the Swiss National Bank, whatever, explains as well. So it happens all across Europe. Jordan did. Happens Germany, England, Switzerland. It was, you know, this was a publication by the Bank of International Settlements, which is international. Actually, that's right. There was a debate in British Parliament several years ago.
On the record. If there are no further points of order, we come now to the main business, backbench business, and to the first
2-hour debate on YouTube was actually debated in the Parliament. It says here exactly the same thing. Right? And not just in Europe. I'm pretty sure, well, I'm very sure. Stop that. Where is it? Alright, this is statistics taken from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Right, if you want to do it yourself, just go RBA, might be publications, or might be statistics, statistical releases, financial aggregates. Oops. Yeah, these ones. You just go this one and this one. Lending, credit aggregates, monetary aggregates. So I took M3, that's the one I took, saying how much money there is in the economy. So here in the notes maybe. M3 is defined as M1 plus all other deposit banks, blah, 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 blah. It's basically the best measure of money in the economy, or broad money. It's much the same anyway. I think I used M3. I can't remember, it was like 2 years ago when I did it. I think there was a reason I chose M3 over broad money, but I can't remember. And the other one, no, it's this one. Just open that one. data I got would have been this one, loans and advances from banks. You see, it gives you the data from, what, 1976 here. And all the way down to there. That's 2579. What's going on here? I don't know what I've done. Billion, units billion. So 2579 billion is 2.5 trillion. It's a lot of money. And you can see here when you graph these, I've got them both here. You graph them, bank loans and M3 money supply. They're very, very similar since 1985. They follow a very similar curve upwards. Maybe they'd be even closer if I took broad money instead of M3. I don't know. Well, they would be, I guess. Broad money is up here. I don't know why there's a small gap here. It's small, but it's about, what, 400 billion or something. I don't know why it's not exactly the same when it seems that it should be, but you can see that it's generally the same curve, which suggests strongly that when a bank makes a loan, then the money supply also goes up, which means that they create the money out of nothing. Definitely supports that theory. So that's the evidence I have. I think there's some quotes I have somewhere for, American economists saying the same thing, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I do for sure, actually. I think I have Joseph Fritzl from... No, he's not American. He's from the World Bank. Anyway, that's the evidence I have for this. When a bank makes a loan, the money is created. When the loan is repaid, the money is destroyed. And I put principal here because it is the principal that's destroyed. Let's add something here. Insert columns to the right. Okay. Because it's the principal that's destroyed, and I'm quite certain that the interest remains because that's their profit, right? Of course they want to keep their profit. They're not going to destroy their profit. And what this means, first of all, I don't think you can really call it a loan if you're not actually lending something that you have, right? It's not really a loan, right? I don't know what the actual definition is, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. If the money's not... If the money's not yours, then how can you call it a loan? Furthermore, I'll get to that after. Technically, technically when they're creating money out of nothing, that is a form of counterfeiting, no? I know that the money gets destroyed as well, eventually, after, the 30-year mortgage, but it's temporarily creating new money. And I don't understand why our commercial banks are allowed to do this, you know. And another ramification would be that charging interest cannot be justified. You can't. How can you charge? Like, the interest is for the risk to the bank because you might never repay that. You might go bankrupt or whatever. You might never repay the loan. So that's one risk that the bank faces, and that's the main excuse for charging interest, and just the general time money equation, you know. If you give someone money at an earlier date, you should get more back because you could have done something with that money, right? But if the money's not yours at the start, I don't see how you can justify charging interest at all. And if you can't justify charging interest, then that would mean there is rampant economic, I'll say financial exploitation from bankers, no? Okay, doesn't want to do it. Alright, anyway, that's rule number 1. Rule 2, also very important. And that is that governments have the ability to create money, right? Now this should be much more obvious than banks having the ability, but also it's not obvious. Most people generally don't know this. But if you're a sovereign government, right, of course you should be able to produce your own currency. If you're the Australian government, who creates Australian dollars? Obviously everyone knows that the Royal Mint produces the coins and the cash, but like I said, cash is not only a very small total of the money in circulation. So where does the rest of the money come from? Well, obviously I just explained it, but the mint is part of the government anyway, right? It's the government. Of course the government can make their money. The Australian government can make Australian dollars. It's so obvious, right? Makes perfect sense, really. I mean, who else is going to make it? Well, who else should make it? No one. But you have this idea that, I'm going to start with ramifications here. It's just easier for my thoughts. You have this idea that the government needs your taxes to pay for other stuff. But if it creates its own money, then it doesn't. Furthermore, this is what it means, right? Deficits. Taxes do not fund the government. Governments cannot go bankrupt, which also means that a government bond should always be, there shouldn't be any risk with a government bond. There's not. There's a story about that actually. And the government deficit can always be repaid. So there's talk about national debt. You hear a lot about it, especially in America. They have huge national debt, also known as public debt. It can always be repaid. A lot of the national debt they talk about is foreign debt, and we'll get into that maybe in part 2. I'll make another video talk about it in part 2. So let's find evidence for this that I 100% know. Although it makes perfect sense, let's find evidence so that it's 100% sure. I have in my hands a book by Warren Mosler. It's called Soft Currency Economics 2. What everyone thinks that they know about monetary policy is wrong. Very good book. You should all get it. It's only 80 pages. Right. Actually, rather than that, there's an even better way. What's it called? 7 Deadly Sins. There's an even shorter book that you should get by Warren Mosler also. Seven Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy. Alright, let's go. Let's go. Government must raise funds through taxation or borrowing in order to spend. In other words, government spending is limited by its ability to tax or borrow. Federal government spending is in no case operationally constrained by revenues, meaning that there is no solvency risk. In other words, the federal government can always make any and all payments in its own currency, no matter how large the deficit is or how few tax it collects. Yeah, because it creates money. It makes money. Ask any congressman or private citizen how it all works, blah, blah, blah. This is the killer question that no one gets right. How are you going to pay for it? This is the whole, we're going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. It's pretty stupid considering the American government can just make American dollars and the Mexican government cannot make American dollars. So they either have to pay they have to pay for the wall in American dollars that they have, which they would otherwise use by spending on general American products, or they're going to pay for it in Mexican dollars, which doesn't make any sense. I want proof. Okay, here's a quote from a good Federal Reserve Bank Chairman Ben Bernanke on 60 Minutes for support. Scott Pelley, is that tax money that the Fed is spending? Chairman Bernanke, it's not tax money. The banks have accounts with the Fed, much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. Okay. The chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank is telling us in plain English that they give out money, spend and lend simply by changing numbers in bank accounts. There is no such thing as having to get taxes or borrow to make a spreadsheet entry that we call government spending. I want more evidence. I want more evidence. I'm going to open the Soft Currency Economics 2 book. Mechanics of federal spending, 29. The federal government maintains a cash operating balance. Want more evidence because there's so much talk about having to balance the budget. Governments don't want to be in deficit. I've heard this from Malcolm Turnbull the other year. I don't listen much to press releases because they're obviously all retarded. But there's talk about balancing the budget all the time. The government doesn't want to be in deficit. Taxpayers are paying for things, all this stuff. So people are not very aware, so I want good evidence. And also there's conspiracy theories like, the Federal Reserve is a private bank and stuff like that, which may be true. I know that the Reserve Bank of Australia makes a profit, which means that it would be a private bank, I guess. But it also, the government is a client of it, and much of what it does is as an extension of the federal government. Apart from that Ben Bernanke quote, I'm going to read this start of this book to you. 20 years ago, an Italian epiphany. Circumstances in the early 1990s. Italy was on the verge of default because their debt to GDP ratio exceeded 110%, and the lira interest rate was higher than the Italian growth rate. So there was concern in the 90s that Italy would default on their debt. And then he says he and another guy went on a plane to Rome, and they had a meeting with Professor Luigi Spaventa, a senior official of the Italian government's Treasury Department. Alright, I'm going to read this word for word. After we exchanged greetings, I opened with a question that got right to the core of the reason for our trip. Professor Spaventa, this is a rhetorical question, but why is Italy issuing Treasury securities? Is it to get lira to spend, or is it to prevent the lira interbank rate falling to zero from your target rate of 12%? I could tell that Professor Spaventa was at first puzzled by the questions. He was probably expecting us to question when we would get our withholding tax back. The Italian Treasury Department was way behind on making their payments. They had only 2 people assigned to the task of remitting the withheld funds to foreign holders of Italian bonds. And one of these 2 was a woman on maternity leave. Professor Spaventa took a minute to collect his thoughts. When he answered my question, he revealed an understanding of monetary operations we had rarely seen from Treasury officials. No, he replied, the interbank rate would only fall to 1 to 2%, not 0%, as we pay 1 to 2% interest on reserves. His insightful response was everything we had hoped for. He was a finance minister who actually understood monetary operations and reserve accounting. I said nothing, giving him more time to consider the question. A few seconds later, he jumped up out of his seat, proclaiming, "Yes, and the International Monetary Fund is making us act pro-cyclical." My question had led to the realization that the IMF was making the Italian government tighten policy due to a default risk that did not exist. A week later, an announcement came out of the Italian Ministry of Finance regarding all Italian government bonds. No extraordinary measures will be taken. All payments will be made on time. Italy did not default, nor was there ever any solvency risk. Insolvency is never an issue with the non-convertible currency and floating exchange rates. We knew that, and now the Italian government also understood this and was unlikely to do something stupid, such as proclaiming a default when there was no actual financial reason to do so. So if this story is true, and I have no reason to believe it's not, it's quite amazing, really. The Italian government can produce lira, or whatever the Italian currency is, because they're a solvent, well, they were, not anymore. They were a sovereign nation, able to issue their own currency. But they just didn't realize that. The government didn't realize that. And it took some guy to tell them that. That's amazing to me. It's so obvious, right? Like, but I don't know how to put that down as evidence here.